William Johnson was born a slave, but freed as a young boy. He was known as the Barber of Natchez. He became very prosperous, owned 3 shops, and acquired substantial holdings, rental property, timberland, farm acreage, and slaves. He was highly respected for his fair dealings and good business judgment. His very detailed and comprehensive diary contributed considerably to the account of everyday life and times of those years in Natchez and earned him the title of American Diarist. He was murdered, and his accused murderer was never convicted. William Johnson was murdered on June 16, 1851. 75 years later, his diary was discovered and became one of the most important first-hand accounts of life in the antebellum South. He was born into slavery, but his owner, also named William Johnson and thought to be his father, emancipated him in 1820. His mother, Amy, had been freed in 1814, and his sister, Adelia, in 1818. Johnson trained with his brother-in-law, James Miller, as a barber and began working in Port Gibson, Mississippi. He returned to Natchez, becoming a successful entrepreneur with a barbershop, bathhouse, bookstore, and land holdings. Though a former slave, he went on to own 16 slaves himself. He began a diary in 1835, which he continued through the remainder of his life. Also, in 1835, he married Anne Battle, a free woman of color with a similar background to his, and they had 11 children. Johnson loaned money to many people, including the governor of Mississippi, who had signed his emancipation papers. Johnson, who was murdered in 1851 over a boundary dispute by a mixed-race neighbor named Baylor Wynn in front of his son, a free black apprentice and a slave. Wynn was held in prison for 2 years and brought to trial twice. Johnson was such a well-respected businessman that the outrage over his murder caused the trial to be held in a neighboring town. In that town, no one knew Wynn, so they didn't know that he was half black. Since Mississippi law forbade blacks from testifying against whites in criminal cases, Wynn's defense was that he was half white and half Native American, making him white by law. The defense worked. None of the black witnesses could testify, and Wynn escaped conviction. So this is why his murder case is not exactly cold. It's just that his murderer got away with it, and that's a shame. Johnson's diary was rediscovered in 1938 and published in 1951. It reveals much of the daily life of a 19th century Mississippi businessman, including the fact that he was himself later a slaveholder. His papers are archived at the Louisiana State University. Through an act of Congress, the home of William Johnson became a part of the Natchez National Historical Park in 1990. We are in search next, if we can find it. We're having trouble finding another grave. The Barber of Natchez, William Johnson, born a slave and freed as a young boy, was known as the Barber of Natchez. He became very prosperous, owned 3 shops, and acquired substantial holdings, renting property, timberland, farm acreage, and slaves. He was murdered, and his accused murderer was never convicted. I do not know who his accused murderer was because it does not state that here, but I'll try to dig up some more information. But in the meantime, we are trying to find his grave, and his name is William Johnson. He was known as the Barber of Natchez.